I've had a lot of scars over the years and learned a lot of things, why things didn't work and didn't go well. Very early on, when I got hired from General Electric Company, I was in engineering, and I designed something and put it down on the floor, and it didn't work. And my boss said, "You're going to live on that floor until you make that project work." And I got into manufacturing, and I stayed there. I just loved it. But being in manufacturing, a lot of times you had things thrown over the wall from engineering, and then we had to figure out how to make it work. And many times, when I look back at it, projects really weren't successful, or they didn't meet the introduction when they were supposed to be complete, or there were price overruns, twice the price of what we thought they were going to do, or it cost to implement it. And there's a lot of different reasons, and a lot of it starts from the top on leadership. Is the objective fully understood from the organization all the way down to the floor? Do you have buy-in from the bottom to the top up? Do you have communication as you go through the stages of any project? Do you status the project? Do you understand what it is? A lot of it, here again, is just communication, and that's the key. You fully define the goal or what the target is, and everybody understands what the target is, and then you try to figure out how you get there. One way to do it is, believe it or not, is theory of constraints. It's Eli Goldrath basically came out with a book, The Goal, way back in the 80s. And I went through that course early on in my career, and I learned a lot from it. And here again, you're trying to figure out what the constraint is. And a lot of times, what you think the constraint is really isn't the constraint. It's down within the structure of the project or the organization, whatever it may be. And you got to identify how are you going to resolve it. I mean, one of the things I learned at Harris when we started running major projects, because when I went into Harris and the Farallon division, where you and I worked, we were the worst division within the Harris Corporation. And we put a plan together to be the best within the corporation. And part of it had to do with the engineering side of the project side of the business. May it be implementing a new production line or introducing a new product. And we went through theory of constraints training there, which helped quite a bit. But here again, you define what the target is, when it needs to be released. It's like a new car introduction. It's got to come out in the fall. You can't wait until the spring to get a new car out. You know, you've got a target. You got to understand what you got to do to get there. But how do you ensure that you stay on time? So you kind of sit down and break the project up into elements, and then you do a timeline in each one of those elements, how much time or estimate, how many in engineering hours it's going to take, and then you status that. And you always keep a little bit of reserve at the end, because not everything's going to be on time, and other things are going to be behind schedule. And some will be ahead. And that's a key element to try to ensure that things do not fail. The other interesting thing, because I talked a little bit before about being in manufacturing and throwing a project over the wall. You know, it's out of engineering, now manufacturing, you figure it out. And you can have supply chain issues. It could be a sole source supplier that impacts you. And engineering got the best price on that particular component with the biggest pizzazz with the things that component can do, and they really think, you know, it's the coolest thing. But if you only have one source and you can't get it and you can't ramp it up to go with volume, where are you going to go? So one of the things that we realized early on in my career at Harris, which is now L3 Harris, is to form these clusters and bring everybody together in regards to engineering, component engineering, purchasing, manufacturing engineering, in manufacturing and put them in these clusters and assign team members in there so they can communicate. And the best way to do it is put them in an open environment where they have to talk to each other. If you have cubicles, don't make them any higher than 5 feet. So everybody has to be able to communicate. Have status meetings every day. Make the status meeting stand up. It's a stand up. You report out and have different people maintain the data that gets reported on and on a timely basis. We realized when we started to do that, the projects came in ahead of schedule and typically under budget. But it all comes back to communications back and forth and doing the reviews that normally you throw over to another department. Well, this document has to go through component engineering, then it needs to go through quality control, and then reliability control, and then it goes to procurement to identify the lead time and the pricing. So trying to improve the communication is the key.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned moments ago about leadership buy-in and buy-in at all levels of the organization. You also use the picture of throwing it over the wall. I think sometimes, depending on the size of the organization, the business owner or the CEO or somebody at the top will say, hey, I got this new thing we need to do. Here, y'all go do it. And kind of toss it out there and expect somebody's going to run with the ball. But I think I'd be curious to hear your experience, but my experience has been, regardless of the size of the organization, if the top person or people were passionate about and involved in and part of the communication, part of the rollout, part of setting direction. We used to use the analogy of the bumpers on the bowling lane, right? So
yeah.
One of the things you did at Harris early on was you form this team and then you say, okay, here's the parameters that you can play in. Here's the boundaries. You can spend up to $300, this week on, whatever, with no purchase. You don't have to go through the standard purchase authorization. This is, at 300, 3,000, whatever the number was, that the team can decide to spend without all the traditional approval cycles. And you would say you can, anything within this area, you can redesign or redo. You've got the authority to do that. But you didn't give us carte blanche to just go out and spend however much we wanted and implement whatever. And often the parameters were within these days, or so like if we were doing a Kaizen blitz, within the next 3 days, you could change whatever you can change in the next 3 days. So we couldn't come in and say, hey, we want to put in a whole new computer system, because that wasn't going to happen in 3 days. But we could say, we need a whiteboard, we need an Excel spreadsheet built, because we could do that in the next 3 days, right? And so I think part of this communication is creating the cross-functional team like you described and empowering them. And part of the way you empower them is to say, here's your boundaries. Here's what you're authorized to do.
And that's what's key. And back in the Harris days, I had multiple plants. I had a couple of them in Canada and the headquarters out in the San Jose area and the main manufacturing plant here in San Antonio. And I can remember they were doing a major rearrangement in conjunction with the Kaizen at the main production area that we had. And I was flying back to do a review on the Kaizen and what the plan was. It was getting toward the end of the month, and we had to make a particular goal because we had this big contract going on. And I get down, and they're going through the Kaizen, and they're talking about what was going to be done and everything else, and talking about the return on investment. And I said, well, let me walk out and kind of see what you guys want to do. And they said, well, we've already done it. And I walked out and I went, wow, and if anything else, it improved efficiency, and we overshipped that month. And it was only 2 weeks left in the month, but we were able to pick up a little bit of a push because what they did, because it was a bottleneck at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was the constraint.
The constraint
at the time.
Theory constraints.
Yeah. So this idea of buy-in, though, I'm sure I know I've seen it. I'm sure you've seen somewhere down the organization, the chain of command. If they just get obstinate about the change and block it for their part of the organization, they can actually affect the bigger return or the bigger progress of the organization. So it's not just buy-in from leadership has to buy in, but your upper level management, your mid-level management, your lower level management, the people on the shop floor, which what we found, at Harris, and that was when the world's first discovering, all the things we look back now as standard, but lean and TQM and Kaizen and just in time, all those were being birthed around that time. And the American manufacturers were embracing those ideas and those concepts. And what we found was the cross-functional team with a little bit of authority was the best mix of everything.
And that's true. And the other thing is how can you improve communication? Because communication is in the key. And very early on, we realized if we used a tool like Myers-Briggs, 16 different personality types. I'm an ESTJ as an example. Mm-hmm. What are you, Joe?
I'm an ENTJ.
Yeah, okay. But once you understand what that means and how it makes that other person tick, you can improve communication. So we were doing Myers-Briggs on all the teams. Mm-hmm. And the other cool thing that we did is a lot of times we'd break out into these continuous improvement activities, especially with the Kaizen, and we kind of sit around the circle. And we have Kush balls. And I can remember going to Toys R Us and had a shopping cart because I was buying it for the entire plant because I had the credit card back then. and this lady was behind me. She says, "Boy, you got a lot of Kush balls in there. You must be having a party." I said, "No, I'm buying them for work." And she goes, "Well, that must be a fun place to work." And it was, so it's catchball. You kind of go around and everybody gets a chance to speak because some people are extroverts, some people are introverts, and you want to hear from everybody because everybody has an input.
Yeah, and what I found personally was that often the quietest person in the room had the best input. Sometimes it was they had an idea none of the rest of us had thought about, or they had an insight none of the rest of us had seen. Sometimes they had the negative against the prevailing wisdom in the room. And then when they say the negative out loud, everybody's like, "Oh my goodness, how could we have missed that?"
Oh, I know. But, and here again, the secret sauce for Toyota is people engagement. And how can they get people engaged? And once you figure that out, you can create a high performance team.
Yeah, I think that was probably the biggest thing for me coming out of college and working with you and in the Harris days as the world was embracing a lot of what we consider textbook now, but then it was cutting edge. This idea of trusting your hourly workers with some authority and some responsibility to change a process.
Hey, the last thing you want them to do is check their brain out at the door. They work that operation every day. They know what works, what doesn't work. The worst thing you can do, in my mind, being an operations guy, if you're going to be doing a relayout on the factory, and if you don't get the team members involved with it, you're going to make a mistake because they're there day in and day out. They know what works, what doesn't work. And if you don't get their input, then because you didn't ask me, I just know it's going to fail.
Yeah. I remember, and this was in one of the classes that you sent me to, they were talking about universities often are trying to enforce the rules to get the students to stay on the sidewalks. And so this one university had this brilliant idea of, let's build the new part of the campus with no sidewalks. And then see where the paths they create in the grass, and then we'll put the sidewalks there. And so they didn't have to worry about enforcing the students to walk on the sidewalks because they laid the sidewalks where the students walked. And, brilliant, simple concept.
It was getting people involved.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us for this episode of A Leader's Journey podcast. If you enjoyed it, give us a thumbs up and remember to subscribe to our channel.